Hello and welcome to the Parker Files, where today we're going to be taking a look at the Fiend from Toys R Us. This is the unlicensed version of the Green Goblin, and it's from the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man film. If you're new to the channel, there'll be more Marvel 6-scale figures and diorama reviews coming your way, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss those. And if you are a subscriber, thank you for stopping by once again and your ongoing support of the Parker Files. For the packaging, Toys R Us have done a really nice job creating a sinister silhouette on an entirely black box. I really like how they have the name of the figure in a reflective green that speaks to the Green Goblin, and I love that they use the movie-style font from 2002. On the sides of the box, we get a really nice silhouette of Willem Dafoe, or should I say Norman Osborn, and on the other side, we get a contrasting Green Goblin image. This is a subtle yet effective touch as it speaks to the duality of the character. The box itself is a simple, more muted black, while the images on it have more of a reflective gloss that looks really great in different light. The main image of the Green Goblin on the front of the box looks fantastic. I love the pose that they've chosen for this artwork and how it stands out in the contrast of the two blacks. The back of the box incorporates more of the green font to give us all the legalese, and while it looks pretty basic at first glance, it's only due to the way the light reflects the image used here, or in this case, should I say, how the light doesn't reflect the image. A closer look reveals that there is an image of the glider on its stand in the Oscorp lab. I do wish this image was more glossy like the other images in the box so that it could be seen better, as it's a great graphic and a great callback to the film itself. Alright, enough about the packaging. Let's open it up and see what's inside. Here we have Gobby out of the box, and I have to say, for my first roll of the dice on an unlicensed figure, I'm not blown away, but I am impressed. There are some things that I noticed right away that remind me that this was not an official release, or a Hot Toys release for that matter. But that said, I wasn't expecting that level of quality either, so that's why I'm not going to be too overly critical. While I wish Hot Toys would give us more figures like this, it's doubtful they will, so I'm tempering my expectations and trying to be more optimistic and thankful that I can have the Green Goblin on my shelf at all. So, first reactions on the Toys R Us Green Goblin are positive. Starting from the ground up, the boots are a separate piece altogether, which I'm always thankful for as it allows for some great articulation, and that's going to be needed with this figure, especially when he's on his glider. The sculpt on these boots is decent, as is the paint app. And for all you sneakerheads out there, while I didn't notice it in the movie, these look to be modified Nike Flight Posits to me. Maybe Norman Osborn was a big Tim Duncan fan, I don't know, but let me know in the comments what you think. Moving up to the shin guards, you get the first look at the undersuit, which is an interesting rubbery style vinyl. It almost feels a little bit to me like a diver's wetsuit, as it's somewhat of a spongy texture. I have no idea how this material will hold up over time, especially considering the need to have this figure in some sort of dynamic pose almost exclusively. So while the durability isn't unknown to me, aesthetically speaking, I have to say, I think it looks awesome. The color is perfect, and the gold accents along the sides of the legs, while I didn't notice them in the film, they're a unique detail that contrast really nicely against the green. The armor plating on the shin guards and upper thighs are a harder rubber, as are the knee pads. The sculpt on these details is nicely done, and my only gripe about them, as with the rest of this figure as a whole, is the paint app. Not that it doesn't look great, because it is impressive for an unlicensed figure, but the thing that I noticed right away is the smell. It smells like a pumpkin bomb or can of spray paint went off on this figure, and it's just a little bit too much. Besides the smell, one of the first things I noticed when I got this figure out of the box were how long the pants were and how they bunched at the ankles. At first I thought it was a poor design, but the more I look at this figure, I actually think it was an intentional choice due to the articulation this figure will be in on his glider and how those leg positions may impact the gaps at the ankles. I'm not sure about all this just yet, but we'll find out a little bit later together in the review. Similar to the legs, the material on the undersuit on the upper outfit is the same spongy, rubbery vinyl, and it appears as though it's going to be perfect for a figure that needs great articulation. You can see on the back that there are some intricate contrasting lines that create a nice silhouette, and the seam for the stitching, while noticeable, isn't a complete atrocity. The outer armor material is the same as the lower body as well, and my first reaction is that it looks amazing. I love the sculpt of each of these pieces, I love how they're painted, right down to the slightest touch of gold in the bicep armor. I love how seamless all these armor pieces work with the undersuit to create a one-piece aesthetic. Simply put, the armor looks fantastic. But my long-term concerns for this figure center around the durability of all these pieces. The armor appears to be glued onto the undersuit, and without posing this figure once, you can see one of the flaps is already separated on the bottom on the left side. Again, this was the type of thing I expected from an unlicensed figure, so while I'm not shocked or surprised, I am concerned. I'm concerned about the knee pads, shoulder pads, and arm gauntlets over time, especially if this figure is posed dynamically for an extended period of time, which is most certainly my intent. As always when it comes to Hot Toys and other 1/6 scale figures, the head sculpt is what gets the praise or causes the biggest commotion in the collecting community. And even though this is technically a mask and not a head sculpt, this mask is as sinister and attention grabbing as it was in the film, and one look at it takes me back to 2002 and into that hospital room where I can hear Aunt May yelling, "Those horrible yellow eyes!" The sculpt on this mask is really well done. I appreciate the lines on the back of the helmet and the attention to detail in the expression, especially over those yellow-green eyes. The paint apple, I think it could have been a little smoother. It is a screen-accurate metallic green, and overall, I love how it looks. The teeth are jagged and painted well, and what I really like is that they included a mesh over the mouth itself, and through it, while you won't see Willem Dafoe specifically, there is a mouth plate, and the shadow from the mesh creates the illusion of a face, which is a nice, accurate touch to how the mask looked in the film. Like most collectors, I would have loved a full Norman Osborn head sculpt with this release, but even if I had gotten it, I don't know that I would use it because this is the Green Goblin I want on my shelf, and so, for a rating of this mask, personally, I'd give this sculpt a 9 out of 10. In terms of accessories, the Fiend doesn't come with a whole lot, but overall, I'm very pleased with what we get. First up, we see the Green Goblin in a modified museum pose with one of his pumpkin bombs. Before taking a closer look at the bomb itself, I do want to take a moment and point out the bunching found in just the slightest bend behind his legs. As I mentioned earlier, I've never encountered this type of material used in this undersuit, so I can't be certain of or speak to the durability of this material over time. What I am sure of is that this material does feel spongy or sticky, and with this bunching increasing behind the knees, I'm a little concerned that it will stick together and eventually, over time, at the very least, pull paint off in spots. Moving on, we get a closer look at the Goblin's pumpkin bomb, of which there are two, and while these aren't 100% screen accurate, I do like how they look and how the Goblin looks holding them. The sculpt on these bombs is well done for such a small accessory. The paint app is serviceable, but where this accessory loses points is in the area of film accuracy. In the movie, the color of the orange portions was more of a metallic orange, and the portions that are yellow here were actually a neon lit green on screen. I know this is a small gripe for such a small accessory, and I have to admit, these look really good in hand. Speaking of hands, you do see two variations here, and they, along with the other two he comes with, are equally well done. These sets of hands have a certain level of realism to them because the texture on them isn't uniformed. And because the paint app is on par with the rest of the costume, these do a great job of creating a one-piece aesthetic. But enough about the pumpkin bombs and the hands that hold them, let's talk about that glider. This is an impressive accessory if ever there was one, and before we talk about it, let me quickly mention the base that holds it. The Fiend is printed on the label using the same Spider-Man font that was on the box. I wish they had left that off of there as no one really wants that name displayed, but that's what you get with an unlicensed figure. The top of the base has a green tinted cracked concrete look with a super high gloss finish. All of this looks okay to me, but the real reason I point out the base is that this is unique in that there are three options for how you can use it. There is the standard crotch grabber option for those who just want to display the figure on his own, or there are two flight pole options. One is a shorter flight pole option that's shown here, and there's also a much larger option as well. Okay, enough about the base, let's get on to the glider. This thing is massive and impressive. Some have commented that it's a little undersized, but I don't see it personally. In fact, what I see here is the greatest part of this release. So much so that I don't even know where to start. The details in the sculpt work are exceptional, the lines are well defined, and the use of mixed media complement each other really well. The main body has a metal aesthetic to it, while the purple on the top has more of a rubbery texture. Both of these look fantastic in and of themselves, but it's the dry brush over the top of these finishes that simulate grease and dirt, along with the gold accents on the panels and the circles that bring this glider to life. Not only does this glider look fantastic, it's functional as well. The articulation in the wings is impressive, but the fact that there are real metal pistons working underneath is even more impressive. So too are the real wires underneath that move with the wings. The articulation also extends to the top of the wings where you see the 2 foot holsters. These are really well sculpted right down to the toe pegs and heel grabber, and all of these details are accentuated by a well-detailed paint app. The same dry brushing gives the metal a nice worn look, and the ability to move these foot holsters around to accommodate some different poses is made possible by the ball joints at the bottom of these pieces. For an unlicensed figure, the engineering quality and attention to detail in this glider is unexpected and really impressive. Here we have the Green Goblin on top of his glider, and there's no other way to say it. I'm blown away by how awesome this looks. The minor gripes with each of these pieces individually is quickly overshadowed by how overwhelming this is when it all comes together. First up, let's take a look at the glider, specifically where the Goblin's feet attach to the foot holsters. The feet are secured by the toe holder and heel grabber and a small peg that slots into the corresponding hole in the feet themselves. While they slide into the holster really easily, it did take a bit of futzing to get the first foot to stay in place while securing the second. I found that posing the figure prior to slotting it in made the process a little easier. The concerns I have for the material sticking behind the legs at the knee bend are still there, but I wanted to note the pooling of material at the ankles that I mentioned earlier in the review. As you can see, when the figure is on the glider and in more of a dynamic pose as shown here, that pooling isn't as noticeable. In fact, in my opinion, it actually looks a little more natural. What isn't as natural as I would like is the articulation. I was hoping that the swivel at the hips, the double bend in the knee, the ball joints at the feet and foot holsters on the glider, I was hoping all these points of articulation, in combination with the articulation of the glider itself, would all lead to more dynamic posing. But it's just not as easy to accommodate as I would like. Speaking of articulation, let's move on to the upper body, where there are some positives and some negatives. Bad news first, because the chest and torso are one piece, there really isn't the movement that you would like to make flight poses more dynamic and lifelike. There is a separation at the waist which does allow for some movement, but that's about it. There are always concessions to be made when it comes to screen accuracy versus functionality, and I have to say, while I wish I could get a little bit more movement here, I am glad that Toys Era erred on the side of screen accuracy here because the overall look is fantastic. The other small gripe to note is at the hips, where again, the material on the undersuit bunches ever so slightly. As I mentioned earlier, I do have concerns about this type of bunching over time, but that's mainly due to my inexperience with this type of material. The same can be said at the bend in the elbow joint, which you can see here on the right arm. While the concerns of the undersuit are still there, the range of motion is great due to the type of material used, the double joint, and the placement of the armor pieces. The articulation at the shoulder joint is shown here on the left arm, and while the combination of a ratchet joint and butterfly joint accommodates some lifelike positions as shown here, the other concern I have is that these shoulder pieces appear glued on to the undersuit, like the rest of the armor pieces, and I wonder how well this will stay secured over time. One thing to note that I really appreciate though is the double ball joint at the neck. It allows for a wide range of motion and it adds to the realism in poses like this. Spider-Man has always and will always be my favorite superhero, and with the goal of eventually creating a Spider-Man display, I was thrilled when Toys Era announced the Fiend, and I'm so glad that I rolled the dice and got this as my first unlicensed figure. While I did my best to temper my expectations from the very beginning, there's nothing to take back to formula here. Toys Era have not only nailed this release, but they've also set a really high bar for themselves. The sculpt work they've done is fantastic. The choice of materials, while questionable, they look great, and the details in the paint app are exceptional and screen accurate. The figure itself is really well done, the glider is near flawless, and together, this is the Green Goblin, and after it's all said and done, I know, I'm pathetically predictable like a moth to a flame, but I love this figure, and I can't wait to have him on my shelf. So, all in all, after looking at Toys Era's The Fiend and everything he comes with, I'd rate this unlicensed figure a total 9.5 out of 10. I hope that you've enjoyed this video and that you want to stay tuned for more. If so, take a second and hit that subscribe button. There'll be more 6-scale figures and diorama reviews coming your way. But until then, stay safe and collect because you can.